very amazing voices. Dujdao.
Dujdao, Vadhanapakorn.
Dujdao.
Vadhanapakorn.
Dujdao?
Vadhanapakorn.
Okay, great. Who is a producer with performer with B Floor. And then we also have Lisistrata, Lusandiana, okay, from Dujdao. Yeah, and she's actually a visual arts archivist. Yes. And then we have Bilqis Hijjas, who's from Malaysia. She's a dance producer and also runs a residency called Rimbun Dahan, so you should check it out. Okay, so I am actually a very lazy moderator, and my job really is to get people to stop talking. That's all I'm gonna do, and maybe try and sum it up at the end. So what I've done was I gave them 3 questions to think about. So I want to maybe start off with the first question, which is actually talking about cases of political resistance that stand out for them, and maybe they can talk about it. And what is the kind of like relation of that case to their city, Bangkok, Jogja, and KL. Okay, we'll start off with Dujdao.
Thank you, June. Should I speak in English? Oh, okay. But that's translated, that's why I...
Up to you.
But we don't have.
Ah, right, sure. Yeah. So I go in English, but in some difficult words, I might have to like Amita or Sasapin to like. The case study that I would like to present first is the performance called Bang La Bird. Many Thai audience here know it very well, but before I start, I have to like introduce myself. I'm not a professional producer, but in B-Floor, the way we work, we take turns to do everything because we have limited budget. So sometimes I'm a director, sometimes a performer, sometimes a producer. We take turn like within the group. And for this case, there's a performance called Bang La Bird. And on Anong Thai Si Wong, she was a director and she was a solo performer for her performance, and I was the producer at the time. And it was in 2015. At the time, we got invited by Thong Long Art Space to restage Bang La Bird. The first one was in 2013. It was the very first work of On Anong, and it's performed at B-Floor Room. And that work inspired by a real legal case, like Le Majesty Law. And it went quite provoking, but it was still okay until one audience, who is the wife of the real case. At that time, it's a home case. There's a guy, like Liban, got captured because it said that he sent some text that against the Le Majesty Law. And then he was put in jail, and then On Anong was inspired by that event, and she invited the wife of that guy to come and see, and she got followed. The first attempt to come to see the performance, she couldn't make it, she returned home, and then she was trying to do it again, and someone from the production has to escort her back home. So that's one thing like to put at the back of our mind, okay? The art is not that safe. Bang La Bird is in Thai is like the land of violation. It's like in Thai like Bangkok, Bangkok, Noi, Bang King, Bang Rak. It starts from the Bang. Bang it means area. The Birds mean violation. So that's the name of the performance. So that was like 2013, and then 2 years later, Thong Long Art Space bought the production and asked B-Floor to produce this work again on top of the building, at the abandoned area of the building, and this is a play. But 2 days before the press performance, Thong Long Art Space called me that, okay, we got a visit from military, and they wanted to talk to me as a producer of the play, and they left the number, like a mobile phone number for me to call back. So I called back, and they asked me whether I had made any permission to do performance. And I said, I've been doing this for over 15 years. I never done any permission before creating a performance. And I said, you have to now, because now it's like you're under military government. Everything should be given a permission. Is it martial at that time? I'm not very sure about that. Yeah. So I didn't against it at that time. I was listening carefully and I said, okay, what if I do it? How can I do it? I don't know how to do it. I never done it before. Tell me how. And he was telling me, okay, send it to the military, blah 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 blah. Nothing is related to the artwork, but okay, I did it anyway. So yeah, and on the next day he came and checked the performance area, like to check, and all they could see just only like razor blades hanging from the ceiling and like just almost empty space, almost like record space. And they were like, I said, "Gonna happen here?" I said, "Yes," and that's all we got right there. And then yeah, we did all the permission just right before the press performance, and they said, "Okay, we will be there at the press show too. We'll come with the camera and video camera and stuff." And at the time, we got an urgent meeting within B-Floor Theatre, and we were talking like, okay, how are we going to react to this visit and action? Because we feel like it was like a threatening kind of action. So we decided to just like edit some part of the performance just a little bit, which on and on. So sad about it, but we couldn't afford like having her just disappear one day. So we was like, okay, let's edit some sensitive part, which is okay. And then we arranged a meeting, and then we came up with a strategy that okay, we're gonna put ourselves in the spotlight, because at that time there's so many people like just disappeared daily, and on and on shouldn't be one of those. So we like let's write a letter. And we remember we like formed the letter all together until very late at night, and on the next day we like spread it out to all theater friends, to all the press locally and internationally, and we send it to like our theater friends in America, UK, and Southeast Asia as much as we could know, because we want to be in a very, very like in a spotlight, so that people would know if something happened to on and on to us. And on the premiere night, like the first show after the press show, right? We got sold out, and we sold out like almost every performances. Not because like they want to see on and on, only they want to see like how and why military came to see the show. They want to see with their own eyes. No, oh sorry, for the press, they didn't show up, which so many people was so disappointed. They didn't show up, right, on the press performance?
I remember, I think they showed up every night.
Yeah, but not the press. The press, like, they couldn't like manage in time, right? But after that, every single show, they will come, like, on time, two militaries, one tripod, one camera, at the same spot, sitting, like, actually, like right here, like this, undercover military, and they will stay until like until all the audience would be gone, and they would go home, and then we could have the post-show talk after they're gone. And we like arranged with yeah, and on and on. We came up with the ideas like this is the act of threatening, so don't be afraid. Otherwise, we're gonna be the victim. Just do your art, do what you want to do, and just treat them as like normal audience. And that's how to do it. And she even played with the camera. And this is the military undercover, like filming her while she's performing. And we got a very, very good backup. We got like UN officer who's like specialized in human rights to come and then give advice, like how to react, and you can ask so many questions as you want. don't be afraid. And we got so many allies and friends to back up, so the performance went like smoothly every day, and this is a show. And she's so brave, and that's all I want to share. It sounds very simple, but at that time it wasn't that simple because it's not usual to see like military filming you, watching you right there every single night, every single move. They're like, and all the audiences, they were like, oh, I was being filmed too. They were like, and it happened.
How about after that? After the show, do they still approach you, and for your future shows, were you on a list, or did they come?
Some, like another show, like a fundamental. How many years later? Maybe a year, or maybe two, 3. There's so many visits from literary, but not to only be from theatre productions. Too many events like discussion panels, just like this. If this day happened or occurred during that time, maybe we got like a visit from them too.
And the other theatre companies, they experienced the same thing after Bang La Me, or actually around the same time or before? Or this is something that you felt like it was going to, you need to be aware of, it could happen?
They were aware because there was one day when we got approached by the military. Our artistic director, Kanye, said, okay, we should ask like Bangkok Theatre Network to have a meeting, whether they could support us, to back us. Yes, so they were all aware of this issue. They asked us to whether run a workshop to them, for them, how to write a letter to the military, which we didn't do.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, June has given me the questions a few weeks ago, and quite difficult questions for me. It's like what we've been doing so far is not that heroic as probably June imagined. Maybe I introduce a little bit about what I've been doing with my friends in Jogja with Indonesian Visual Arts Archive. What we've been doing is archiving, documenting, and researching on visual arts and contemporary arts. And I will probably share one or two projects that might be related with what June has already asked, the 3 difficult questions. But yeah, the first one is I'd like to share on the data catalog on art action in Jogja as an urban space. So it's very little aspect of Indonesia. Jogja is a small province, and in our point of view that how Jogja has transformed itself, it's been designed by the national government as a city of as a cosmopolitan city. It has become more urban, and they design it that way so that it's become cosmopolitan city. And the activity of art and culture has been designed to support tourism industry, and it leads to commodification of art and culture process. On the other hand, we also have creative economy sector who support many artists in producing works. It is independent from, well, not really independent, but it is created by the government, and it tries to mainstreaming creative industry. That the practice of the activities of art and culture has its aspect of creative industry that gives contribution to national income. That's how they think about how the practice, the art practices. And within that context, we would like to read and contextualize the art practices in our city. How does art has power, or art practices has its power to within the social transformation, or we want to widen the subject of art itself by questioning who is artist actually. Are they people who do performance on stage? Are they painters and who exhibit their works in the galleries? Or are they just people like me, normal citizen who didn't know what exhibition means, what performing art means. So we want to widen that, and we put few examples on how people survive, how they defend their land as part of artistic practices. And we use the 1998 or Reformasi era as a turning point, in which it also affects the production of art. Since then, since 1998, there is a tendency in which people celebrate freedom. They started practice public art, community-based art with the people, with kampung people. And these are a few examples on how mural is also started during that era. Before there were not much graffiti on murals, but after 1998 there is a tendency that many artists also try to celebrate. And it is another example on alright, yeah, di sini akan dibangun mall. In English is mall will be built in this area. In 2004, the government stated that there will be 12 malls be built in Jogja. And few artists, urban planner, and cultural activists, they collaborate each other they initiated this project for a few days without any funding. They collect money from themselves, and interestingly, they built it takes place in City Square. It's just in front of King's Palace. And as we know that the king and the royal family in Jogja has collaborated with investors till now. Almost, public secret. We call it public secret. We understand the situation, but it's like we can do things, yeah. And another example, theater, well, not really theater group, but in the western part of Jogja, there was a plan of
Sand mining.
Sand mining industry, and the people who live there, they are unhappy with that plan. They try to resist, and this theater group The actors are the people who live there. It's like they tell their own story, so they wrote the story and they perform it themselves.
And was there a theatre group that came in to help them, or they organized themselves?
One person who were active as an actor while he was a student in university, helping them in organizing and practicing and rehearsing. From this process, they were like reflecting on their daily lives and also their daily resistance.
Sorry, just very quickly, there are seats in front for people who are standing.
Please come.
One seat here also.
Alright, okay. Maybe it's gonna be the last example and then I will stop. Festival, Red Pants Festival, initiated by the people who live there, and the context was like this, that it is beach area, quite famous in Jogja. It's very beautiful, and there was an investment plan to build luxurious resort in that area. The people were unhappy with that plan, and then they resist. But once the investors and the legal consultant came, and they underestimate the struggle of the people by saying that you are just red pants people, poorly educated people, you will not win this case. And after that, few weeks later, the people make a parody about the statement from the investor. I think it's a very good example on how ordinary people, not artists, they can just use artistic expression for their own needs. I mean, in that specific contextual case of their life.
What is the parody? Was it
It's a ceremony, apa mas, acara bendera, flag ceremony, which is generally held every Monday in the morning. So it's like routine, national routine.
For elementary students,
Yes.
to have every Monday to a ceremonial flag.
This is in the school? In the school? Or?
No, it's in the beach. In the school, usually it is done in the school. It's like every Monday, every school, from elementary to high school, they have.
Yeah, it's called assembly in Malaysia.
Oh yeah,
So this is adults doing it.
and these are adults
I'm wearing
wearing the uniform of elementary school kids.
And where did they have this thing?
When?
Where?
Where? At the beach.
At the beach.
At the beach, in the area where they will build the luxurious
What did
resort.
they do? Did they sing a song? Or?
They sing a song, just like flag ceremony and political orasi.
And in the end, did it get built?
Not yet. I don't know. It's just being pessimistic, so sorry. I think that these are a few examples on the artistic practices that we can find in my neighborhood. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Lisis.
Yeah.
Maybe we can move on to Bilqis. Maybe we'll put down the project slides and all. You guys have no more slides, right?
Can we turn off the projector?
Hi, I'm Bilqis Hijjas. I'm from Malaysia. Most of the time I work in the field of contemporary dance, and I work as a producer, as a lecturer, and as a critic, and I run a residency program. So significantly in that batch of occupations, I'm not an artist per se, I'm an arts worker, but I don't self-identify as an artist. And the event that I'm going to talk about, I did not intend to be an artistic event. It's not an artwork, although some people have interpreted it as such, which is up to discussion. June asked me to talk about this. At a certain point in my life, I decided I was never going to talk about this ever again. But as she's one of my best friends, I will comply. The example that she wanted me to talk about is the one that happened to me, by me, and around me, which is often known as the yellow balloon case in Malaysia, in which I am also styled as the balloon girl. Note the infantilization of that. It's balloon girl, never balloon woman. So to give you a little bit of background to the context in Malaysia, our previous Prime Minister was one of the most corrupt national leaders known to the world. He made off with about $4.5 billion over the course of his prime ministership. And from the year 2012, there was a series of street protests in Malaysia, initially just calling for a cleaning up of the government, a decrease in the amount of corruption that everybody saw was evident, and then slowly also calling for him to step down and calling for him to be held accountable for all the money that he'd stolen. These street protests were called bersih, which means clean, and their symbolic color was yellow. And in Malaysia, the color yellow symbolizes the royal family's royalty, and it was chosen very deliberately as a color that the authorities could not crack down on, because to crack down on the street protests that were yellow also meant to be making a certain statement about the royal family, which of course, as we know, so you can use this to your own benefit. It's quite useful.
Sorry, yellow means something else also in Thailand.
Yeah, right? Thailand has different color politics.
Quite similar, related to royal family as well. So yeah. If you want to go safe, go yellow.
Go yellow. See? Yes. So after a number of these large protests, which arguably made not that much difference, depending on how you want to interpret it, the Prime Minister was invited to open a major arts festival in Kuala Lumpur, and I had a small performance, or a small part of that festival I was responsible for. And eventually I was charged with the intent to insult and provoking a breach of peace. They took a lot of time and they had a lot of trouble trying to figure out what exactly to charge me with, because what is the crime that is committed by someone dropping balloons filled with air, not anything else, on a festival opening proceeding? I mean, often this is part of the festival opening, right? The balloons fall from the ceiling. So this charge that they eventually found for me, which was really quite broad and could really encompass anything, was actually a very minor charge. It's a minor crime, and the maximum penalty for it was a fine of 100 ringgit, which is about $25. Most people faced with this, especially in Malaysia's very long and cumbersome legal process, would just pay the money and get out. And that was what they were expecting me to do, that this would be a kind of rap on the knuckles, okay, teach that art person that they've been, put in their place, don't do that again, go home. But I had the backing of an organization called Lawyers for Liberty, which is a pro bono legal rights organization, and they provided me with pro bono legal services, and they were prepared to fight this charge. So we went to court. And the court case dragged on for 3 years over a $25 fine. And the interesting thing that happened is that the media came around quite strongly in my defense. The media is very tightly controlled by the government in Malaysia, and many things are not allowed to be said overtly. But what they could do was put the case in the newspaper, and even if they were reporting it in a way that seemed sympathetic to the government, it quickly became apparent how totally ridiculous this case was. And it became a real source of embarrassment for the government that they were being so heavy-handed to try and push through this penalty for having dropped balloons. It dragged on, and then, of course, there was also the allegation that this, too, was a misuse of public funds and civil legal attention. So in an artistic context, my action was really part of a wider set of actions by many Malaysian artists at the time who were deeply invested in this protest movement. Significantly, Fahmi Reza, who started a design of clown masks that looked like the Prime Minister's face, so that whenever you looked at his face, you just couldn't help imagining him as a clown. It was extremely effective. And also the cartoonist Zunar, who depicted Najib as Sapu Man, not Superman, but Sapu Man. Sapu means to take everything. So it's the guy who takes everything. And then eventually, after my case, Sapu Man was also pursued by yellow balloons through Zunar's cartoon. So that we had a lot of but they were also charged in criminal court, and their charges were quite a bit more serious than mine, and they were facing quite a lot more serious jail time than I was. Eventually, possibly, partly in thanks to efforts like these and in thanks to the wider protest community, we did change the government in May last year. So now the former Prime Minister is in court himself, and all of our charges have been dropped, which is, of course, a great relief. But I think it's important to see this in the context of how small gestures of resistance, especially ones that have quite a visible aspect to them, can really be used as quite useful points, leverage points, in order to gain visibility, sympathy, votes eventually. And also the important responsibility, I feel, of the arts community in being part of this, not just because by reputation we are supposed to be, not necessarily supporting the status quo, but also because we have a particular capacity to operate in this symbolic world, in that arts have an advantage in mobilizing the use of the metaphor, in re-meaning that metaphor, and therefore we have a particular responsibility perhaps to be involved in that context. In my particular example, there are so many things, and just listening to Lisis and looking at the examples that Lisis was giving, the wearing of the red pants, the use of color, the use of the very visible body in a space, how you can publicize that. In my case, yes, as I mentioned, there was a lot of infantilization. I was always depicted as this, poor young girl who didn't know what she was doing. Please know I was 38 at the time that I did this. But because unmarried, no children, therefore can be poor young girl, and they are victimizing this poor young girl. And while I didn't necessarily like that, I recognized the kind of political usefulness of this self-presentation. And so when at my charging, I was brought out by the officer and all the bank of cameras was there, and I stood there, and then the press asked me if I wanted to give a statement, and I didn't give a statement. And my venerable and respected father was standing next to me, and he gave a statement. And that went down really well, because, here is my poor child, and I am so well, and it is so terrible, and everyone's like, yeah. You can mobilize around these things. Whether or not you necessarily like them, they can be really useful. So yeah, maybe I'll just
Change the world one step at a time, right?
Yeah,
Don't bring
okay.
down patriarchy, just nudge it, right?
just get out the Prime Minister first, then we'll deal with the patriarchy. It's all right. Same time, exactly. Thank you.
Sorry. Lost my voice. Okay. Just also very quickly, if I could just bring Dujdao and Bilqis back to the point where you were actually going to do these acts of resistance or rebellion. Actually, on more personal note, what was actually going through your mind, and what were you thinking of the the next steps? For you, you had a kind of like a production behind you. For you, I guess I don't know what was going through your mind, right? But yeah, if you could just maybe let us know a sense of it.
Yes, many people have asked me this. What was I thinking? And did I know I was going to be arrested? Yes, I didn't know I was going to be arrested. I had a few days to think about what I would do, because we knew, some of the organizers of the festival knew in advance that the Prime Minister had been invited. Many of the other participants in the festival did not know and were not told, primarily because there was a fear that something like this would be mobilized. I did ask a number of the other participants whether they wanted to do anything. Nobody really felt brave enough under the circumstances, and mostly because this, we are being held over the chopping block with finances. If you misbehave, your money will be taken away, and this project that you've done a great deal to try and put on stage for the festival will of course be cancelled, and no one at that point felt that they were in a position to want to do that. So eventually I decided that I had to do something on my own, and I thought about for a long time about what that should be. And I was very clear that obviously it had to be something non-violent. If you know anything about Malaysia, all of our protests have been extremely non-violent, and we've been very, very proud of this. And Malaysians have become accustomed to a model of protest which is non-violent, and to the idea that that has some kind of moral value to it. So that, for example, recently with the Hong Kong protests, initially Malaysians were extremely sympathetic to the Hong Kong protest. As soon as the Hong Kong protest became violent, a lot of the Malaysian audience just turned their backs on them, because for them that is the step too far. So we know that in our context it has to be a non-violent protest, and the least violent the better. And I thought for a long time, what do I do? And at one point I was like, okay, I'm going to go into the bathroom, I'm going to inflate all these balloons at the same time, and then I'm going to tip them over the edge. Because of course the ironic thing was that I dropped 7 balloons in this massive space. Nobody saw them, except for like the security guards. And then I got arrested. Because it's huge and there's so much going on and nobody really sees these things. So had I not been arrested and had I not been charged, my protest would have come to 0. Nobody would have cared, no one would have noticed. So actually the resistance to my resistance is what made it so ironically useful at the end of the day. But I decided I wouldn't go into the bathroom and inflate like 50 balloons and come out and drop them, because that would look premeditated. So I premeditatively decided not to look premeditated. And that I would blow them up one at a time.
Okay, yeah, sorry. And just a little note, like 2 things really. Like one is the fact that you said, I forgot the point really.
Go to Dujdao.
Yes, Dujdao first.
Back, let me know. I was stuck.
Collectively moderate.
Yes, let's collectively moderate.
So my case, I was the producer, and my best friend on Unknown, and also BIPAM member. She's an artist. The job of the artist is to reflect and raise an awareness what's going on in society, and she wanted to do it because at that time she saw the issue of freedom of expression was like a huge elephant in the room. Under the martial law at the time, it became even bigger and bigger, but nobody would talk about it. So she wanted to work upon that issue. So she created a performance. So my job as a producer is to help her fulfill her needs by passing this message to the audience. Of course, it was a theater, and as well, actually, in each performance, we could fit like 50 audiences, but after the military visit, we got like 80 to 90 audiences per night. because all the citizens wanted to see it with their own eyes, whether it's real. Military really came to like have a very intimate observation, and it happened. And when we use a strategy, spotlight strategy, all the press from international and local spread this message. So I think Ananong's work was beyond the word successful. It's like she could express her agenda, and that's why me as B-Floor Theatre and every B-Floor Theatre member, we like insist to make it continue. Don't stop, don't be afraid. You do what the artist has to do at that time. And that should be like admired. And we would do it like, of course, like peacefully. We didn't harm anyone. We watched the rehearsal again and again and again, and we agreed that nothing is harmful. We like expressing it symbolically, and we asked the audience to think about it together. But we never like create any violence. So for me, Ananong's or director's determination was the thing that helped me and the group like staying there.
Actually, I remember my points now. It's quite related to you because this sense that when you were doing these acts, actually, essentially, you were taking a temperature of actually the government or the people who felt offended. So it may seem insignificant because yes, if they didn't come and arrest you, it may have been just like a conversation over dinner and like, okay, really, you did that? But I think essentially what you also did was you had reflected kind of like the paranoia or how the government was feeling. So the continuity of these kind of acts, I think, quite important. And the second thing I want to also bring up is the sense of non-violence. In Asian societies, like politeness is a big thing, and the sense that if any protest, if any sort of like disagreement about your acts was that you were very rude, that it was disrespectful, that it wasn't the avenue to do that, it wasn't the space to do that. But I think we are, as a society, we are learning that these things may not necessarily be the case all the time, that you kind of need to be a little rude maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think especially in kind of the netizen world, I didn't read these things because I don't want to stew over them, but I think that in the sort of conservative Malay heartland discussions, the description of me was biadab, budak biadab. How to translate? Rude, but what's more than rude in an English context? Insolent. Badly brought up, insolent, just like child.
No manners, no manners.
Stronger.
Activist. Okay. Actually, the other question I was going to ask was about this sense that, these artworks that you do seem very localized, but then do you have any thoughts about how do you possibly translate them into movements or social change? Would you have any opinions about that?
How do you translate
Kind of small acts into the kind of larger movements, if you have an opinion about that.
I think successful movement will directly inspire other movements, just like what happens a few weeks ago with the mass mobilization in Jakarta and also in Jogja, peaceful demonstrations, non-violent in Jogja, and it amplifies in many places. I don't say that good demonstration is the non-violent one. I mean, the example, the military regime, the police have given the example of how rude they are to the demonstrators, to the students, even to the high school students. I'm thinking that it's going to be like without any certain effort, it can directly inspire to other mass movements.
Do you think maybe as producers and programmers, there is a sense that you do want to make it beyond the artwork? Like it goes beyond and it goes into some kind of social change? Or do you feel like really, our jobs is in the context of the art piece and the artists and what they want to say about that?
June, in your kind of provocations to us, you mentioned something about how when you have talked to artists about works that have been used as forms of political resistance, those artists often are hesitant about portraying those works as being part of the movement. Rather, they portray those works as artworks as an end in themselves. And whether, that ties into this question you're having now. And I often wonder whether that's due, because I've also observed it, to a certain coyness about feeling that your art is either being co-opted by a movement and feeling like your art has just become propaganda. And this feeling that art that is propaganda is therefore devalued versus art for its own sake. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can move beyond that kind of gridlock.
I'm wondering actually whether now is a good time to kind of open this question to the floor. If people might have any thoughts about that.
Or artists themselves who don't want their art to be seen as propaganda, maybe that would be useful to hear. But, I think, yes, in terms of being a producer, and also going back to what Lisis was saying about who are the artists? Who, like in these examples that she was giving, who are the artists? If this is an art piece, as well as a form of political resistance, who are the artists who are actually mobilizing this? And are we not in some ways enabled to all become artists? I don't want to devalue the title of artist and say that we are all artists, but I think in some ways, can we not all have some kind of creative contribution? And certainly, when I looked at Bursa, the street protest in Malaysia, it was, to me, very exciting to see how normal people engaging with it had come up with creative visual displays. Normal people had made puppets, and they'd made signs, and they'd, made costumes.
They're changing. They become more, more interactive with the thought during the play. They're more exchanging. They're more like. So I can see hope in the audience. More involved, and more open, and have more tolerance to the different ideas compared to the past, where people will find it safe if, okay, let's think along in the very same way. But now I think the audience has developed their way, because I think that they are aware of the fact that, okay, there's so many different possible ways, but to become an action, not very sure. But yeah, I think they're aware of that fact. So yeah, I still have hope, but I don't know whether things will change or not. When they say thing, I still have no idea what the thing is, but
I think it's hard to maybe link these kind of artistic projects with direct social change. I think generally we feel like the more we do, it kind of adds to things, and it adds to like a rolling kind of like movement, social thing. So yeah, I think my kind of takeaway from the discussions is this sense that you're highlighting your spotlighting, this sense, of really like bringing the attention to the issue, what is really going on, which I think is a very useful strategy. I'm not so sure about your strategy of using playing to.
Playing for gallery?
Yeah.
No, but like symbol using.
Sorry, we have also a response from the audience.
Do we have another mic?
No, just two.
Okay.
just add to the yellow color that we're talking about, is lest you leave this room thinking that yellow will protect you. Because in Malaysia, when we chose the color yellow for the Bersih or the clean movement, electoral reform movement, they did throw water cannons at us and tear gas, and we were arrested and beaten and what have you. So yellow is not necessarily a protection, although that was the idea in the beginning why we came up with in fact, it was Sivarasa who came up with the idea. You know who Sivarasa is. So, the other thing I wanted to say was the co-chair of Bersih was a national laureate, am I pronouncing it properly? Pak Samad, right? So, which was very interesting that this man, old, he's like a wizened old man, wearing white all the time, beard. He looked like a poet, like somebody you would, and he would start, before he starts talking about how the Prime Minister should resign and how corrupt the government is, he would always start with a poem, of course, right? So I think that's something that was very interesting for me, now that I'm sitting here and listening to this, is we actually had a poet leading the largest reform movement, not just nationally, but globally too, because, so that is, I think, something that we kind of overlook sometimes, that there was a poet, he was co-chairing the Bersih movement.
I think Laura, feel free also if you want to share your.
I'm Bing. I'm from the Philippines. Just a bit of sharing. Right now in our country, we have a very bipolar situation. We're in either you're on this side or on that side. The minute yellow is also, one side is called yellow tart. Okay, that's very much identified with the previous administration, and then the other group is with this current administration. So it's a very bipolar situation, such that if you say something and you're immediately boxed in one side, then you become ineffective. So let's say when there was one time we were doing a play very recently, and we wanted to comment on the proposed charter change of the country. And we were saying if we just say things directly, we will be immediately boxed on one side, and the rest of the people that we want to reach out to will not be coming to the show, and we will just be preaching to the choir. So what's the point? You're saying the same things to people who are already in agreement with us. So I was just caught by what she said earlier, that increasingly the audience now is also becoming they want to have more control over a performance. Unlike before, they're really seated there, and then there was an effort to break the fourth wall, but now they really like to go into the performance. And so we thought that maybe that is the way by which we could engage the audience, and not just the usual group who would come, who are already in agreement to the side of what PETA is going to talk about. And this is where we use digital media. Are you familiar with that show on Netflix where you determine how it will go? So that's what we did. The play, we have several versions, and then the audience would vote where they would want the play to go. And, well, I don't know if we were being manipulative or anything, but in the end, I think they generally got the point why it was not very good to support the proposed charter change. But I think what was more important was that in the process, because they were the ones in control of how the play would develop, I think we were able to have a more healthy and more productive engagement with the audience, rather than just directly telling them via our theater why it is not good to do that. But boy, it was really a journey even for us to come up with that device and how we will develop it, because of the so many political sensitivities that we had to consider given the context of our country. Just sharing.
Sorry, Bing. And how the impulse to make this play and the format came from whom? Came from?
It was really an idea of PETA, but in this case, I would admit that a lot of our young people members were the one who really thought of it. How to develop that kind of device, because because really the concern then is, how do you say things now in a very bipolar situation and not preach to the choir? How do you engage those who are not in the usual circles, or how do you now present yourself so that at the onset, you're not just put on one box. On the onset, you're not trashed in by all the trolls when you go online. So, yeah, that's how it developed.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Sharing thoughts. Go on.
Yeah, maybe if you follow some news recently in Jakarta, so seems the city burning, at the same time also sinking. So I just want to share my experience on the protest, not like attending the protest, but I celebrate my birthday in the middle of protest. So it was 22nd of May, so 8 people get killed at the protest. So violence still part of the Indonesian democracy, unfortunately. But the things that I learned from that catastrophic situation, which is the censorship easily can monitor our device. So it's very different compared to the movement in the Reformasi, which everybody connect more like manually or like through phones. But this digital technology, it have two sides. I mean, you can easily connect, but in the same times, you can easily get lost, or even get if the police, for example, discover this phone. Hello, maybe your life may be miserable in the next 2 years because they found many things, hate speech and everything. So, but also another interesting thing from that period, because many of the protesters are very young. They are millennials, so they know how to hack the system. So, for example, they changed the IP. So finally, they could pass the first signal jamming. As we know, the government in Southeast Asia is getting more and more conservative. But the people think when government success control the internet access, people know how to open with IP, but in the same times, many users of internet also have access to open another website. So the same impact of the censorship make the increasing numbers people to see porn site. So which is a good implication. So, but yeah, what I would like to address about the movement later on, a few months ago after the first riots in Jogja, it's where like the first Reformasi movement is led by the one collective artist. I think many artists play a role. For example, Tarik Padi burned the sculpture of the Soeharto in front of the UGM, the university. But seems this movement is very unique because no leaders and artists step back. So many of the protesters are the ordinary students who want to express themselves. So maybe Jogja movement is very inspired. That's why so many sympathize. At the same time, many students in other cities wants to follow what happened in Jogja. But could you elaborate more specifically what the roles of artists? I mean, as I know right now, Jogja has become a hotspot for the international art scene. So everybody looking in the eyes to the city. But seems after the movement, I don't know, where are they? Are they still playing roles in this kind of political circumstances?
Thanks, Mas Irwan. Yeah, that's true that during this situation after Reformasi, our cell phone has been at one point it is a weapon, but on the other hand, it's been their weapon for controlling us. And there are many strategies or tactics that conducted by the grassroots people. There are for the millennials generation, my age, for the example, they have few tactics and strategies. What where are they now? Are they? It's true that the movement is getting more anonymous at this moment. So there is no leader, there is no person that can be the targeted by the government or the police. It is also true that the government is still repressive. They look like they are democratic. The president looks like they are very humanist, but it's not. It is very aggressive. It is very controlling. And yes, it is also true that when Taring Padi in 1998 burned the figure of the statue or the symbolic figure of the power, it shows us that artists can play the role as a leader of social change. But I'm actually in the position of questioning that role. Is it really true that artists in that era, in 1998, plays that role exactly? I mean, I'm not really sure that the contemporary artists during that period, they are the part of the leader of the social change movement. Few cases that I can see the documentations is that few artistic expressions part of the celebration of the movement or the social change. I'm in the position of questioning that. And up to now, the role of the artist, just like what Bilqis has already told us, they make the visual protest more visually attractive. They created such a protest visual images and interesting statements that we can see from the syndicalist protest. It's an organization of creative workers that create solidarity for movement, for also labor movement, also affiliate with labor movement as well. So sorry for being a little bit skeptical with the role of the artist, but that's what I've been seeing so far, that maybe in some cases they are part of the celebration, to celebrate freedom, to celebrate relatively democratic situation after 1998, and then enjoy the democratic era by creating artistic and political, even subversive works. But as a leading player, I question about it. Menurutku gimana? Yeah, that's at least my opinion. Thank you.
Can I just respond to Erwan? So Erwan, as an artist, how do you feel about Liz's opinion?
Yeah, that's my curiosity the same, I think. So I keep observing in the last maybe 3 or 4 protests in Jakarta, and the scheme of the protest changed, but also the expression is still there. I mean, they still use like theatrical element, or like using symbolic or even colors or idiom. So the art's still there, but it's not made by like well-known artists, or maybe artists who recently very popular in the pop culture in Indonesia, but it's just like your presentation, an act who initiated by the local people who just want to express themselves, or like the normal people think the deepest expression by themselves is make an act symbolically. So maybe they don't think it's art, but for us, this is like the gesture of art, the gesture of like more honest expression. So yeah, me and Tita have a problem right now. We don't like to see gallery anymore after the protest. So we just celebrate or any kind of protest. At the same time, we feel that joyful. So there is also solidarity and the beauty of the chaotic things. But yeah, maybe that's my own opinion.
Thanks. Awesome.
Right, thank you for your presentations. Just going back to the topic of this panel regarding producers and programmers and resistance, it seems to me that in many of the case studies, the ones who are initiating or performing the resistance seems to be primarily the artists or members of the community or citizens, right? So I'm trying to understand, going back to the question of what then is the role of a producer in those situations. Is a producer a cheerleader for the artist? Is a producer, let's say, a protector? So often the artist is the one in the front line, right? So when there's any persecution, for example, the artist gets it, the artist is most vulnerable, the artist is most at risk. Would there be any situation when a producer would actually stand in front and take on those hits, for example? So how do you see the role? It can be like a mediator or even, let's say, a dampener. The producer is a dampener. For example, when it's perceived that the artist is prone to maybe, rash or excessive acts, does the producer then sort of step in and say, oh, hang on, don't go there? So then how do you see the role of a producer specifically in those situations when the artist is performing this resistance either to the state power, corporate power, etc.?
Yes, there's so many roles of producer when the artist want to give a message that could be provocative. Yes, to empower, to empower what is right, because sometimes during the way there might be some feeling of hesitation or not quite sure, so we're going to be there to resist. Okay, yes, go on, this one is okay. And from my case, I didn't allow the director to meet directly with the military at all. I will save her and keep her away. And it's only me who have direct contact and to bring them to have a tour and make sure that Onano is not around at the time. Because he cannot do anything until he becomes an audience. At that time, they will meet Onano. Yes, so to be a protector, of course, because Onano is it's about everything about that work. So to make it smooth is a main job. And, but later, this is her second work. I was also her producer. So the message was also related to the same issues. She's like very focusing on this human rights and the freedom of expression. But there's no visit from military. But me as a producer, I was there just to make sure that the message was strong enough. We can go as far as we can, and she can go further. And as a producer, I wanted to bring her work into a spotlight, but different one this time, just to make sure that it would reach wider people, to the wider audience. I want to bring more audience. So my strategy when I'm a producer, especially during these few years, you can disagree with my strategy for sure. I will allow the audience to take a photo during the show, as long as the format of the show allows us to do so. Like on Nong's work, sometimes there's no audience seat. You can go walk around, sit anywhere, and you can just take a photo. We didn't like it at the first place, but we couldn't stop it. No matter how we asked them not to take a photo, they would take a photo. Every time. And it worked so well because when they got home, they like posted on Instagram. And they even post some quote from unknown scripts. And they spread the word and more people came. And we realized, oh, there are new audiences. So as a producer, I gotta make sure that our is Instagrammable and got a very strong visual. And it's okay to fit with the work, not to destroy the artistic point of view. And we had a lot of negotiation and proposal. But of course, Onono has to agree with what I would do. So yeah. So for me, I want to bring her work like wider and wider to reach like more people. And we're based in Bangkok, and some people don't come to the theater, especially when it comes to politics, because they think it's not fashionable, it's not catchy, it's not chic. So I try to make it fashionable and like related to their life, and that's my job as a producer. So yeah, thank you for allowing me to share it.
What did the room have?
A little bit, yeah. Maybe I'm not a good producer because it's like we never use that term. Yes, it's true that we created platform for collaborative works among artists, cultural activists, researchers for conducting collaborative works, or at least responding to social situations or bringing out statements or authentic statements. But yeah, it's a little bit confusion for me. For as a, I'm not sure. I'm a producer. So in the situation, I can feel what Mas Irwan already also feel, that it's more enjoyable when we are in the middle of the movement on the street rather than being in the gallery in this now situation, because what we can do lately or recently within the art ecosystem is we were trying to explicate the problems which were not really visible, but now the exercise of power by the government have been very visible, and it's been very repressive, and people can just see it. So direct action is more interesting at this moment rather than being visible.
Introduce myself again. Ivy from Malaysia, from Fine Art Center. I want to just respond to Alfian's question. For me, it's completely, there's no doubt in my head that the producer has to protect the artist. In fact, the question will be, it's not just the producer, but the team, the company, and other theatre groups, and even social society. And in my experience, I'm crying. I've had that experience where we come together immediately, because any move by the state to oppress anyone, especially artists, or not even especially artists, but anyone, you may not agree with the methodology, but in the first place, when you become a producer for a particular person, I do hope that you've come on board because you believe in that person's work. But assuming that something's happened and he or she starts questioning, by the police, we accompany the person to the police station, we come together, we take photographs, we have press conferences and so on. So any form of oppression, without any question, the producer, the company, other arts companies, and civil society, you will agree with this, Beta, have to come together. So I do not see a kind of like, what is the role of the producer? It's part of your responsibilities for me.
Mita? Oh. Just to go off on what Ivy said, so can you guys give example of what you did in terms, I know, of course, it's a role of the producer to protect the artist or the artwork in a certain way. What do you guys do exactly? Who do you work with to protect those artwork? Do you work with the space? How do you work with the space? Who else do you work with to kind of protect the artwork or the artist?
In response to Ivy's comment, yes, the idea of the whole community coming together, and in response to your question, like how do you make change? Also, Jun's question, where do we go from here? In Malaysia, we've recently set up a coalition called Reformasi, which is a coalition of performing arts workers trying to achieve or push for and advocate for policy change around 3 key areas, which are arts education, finance, funding, tax incentives, and freedom of expression. And Ivy and I are both on the Freedom of Expression Subcommittee for Reformasi, in which we might identify more as producers, in which there's also Joe Kupatas, who's director, actor, scriptwriter. There's also Haryati, who is a journalist primarily. And then when you look at the entire Reformasi main committee, they are also drawn from many job descriptions within the performing arts, not just producers. I think perhaps the significance of the producer is always, yes, protector, cheerleader, enabler, buffer, but sometimes, especially in the Malaysian context, the producers know the most about the actual mechanisms of repression, which the artists may not be aware of. So exactly how you pay your 10,000 ringgit deposit, to whom you pay it, who gets to take it, at what time. If you wear this costume, they will take your money away. The producer is much more aware of that generally than the artists are. Whether or not the producer is often in the position of like nudging the artist towards a safer solution.
It's some kind of policing, right? Because you're so aware of those particular rules and regulations, do you then inform a kind of policing function as well?
Well, perhaps it's more like an informing function, and then a negotiating function, and also because all these works are created by a community, by a team, by a company, and no one, even if the artist wants to do that, it doesn't mean that we all necessarily have to. So these decisions are made in consensus with the creative team, not just, but the producer is there to inform, okay, if you do this, does this break the rules or not? And then it's up to the consensus of the community then to decide whether or not you do that. And I think in the Freedom of Expression Committee, we've been talking about various case studies around kind of flashpoints in freedom of expression with the arts in Malaysia, what the creative team could have done differently to respond to the repressive measures that were taken against them. And these are often, decisions that have to be made by consensus. How do we all feel about putting ourselves on the front line?
And maybe if I could just respond to both Alpha and Amrita. I'm also a producer with Five Arts. I'm not just a moderator in my life. That joke. So basically, I see it really as sharing the risks with the artists, and the whole company takes the risk together. So a lot of times, I see myself doing a little dance with powers that actually can come and close down the show. There was one time where we had to submit scripts, for example, and there was a play that we wanted to do, and it was set in a very contentious year, 1969, when we had terrible racial riots in Malaysia, in KL. So we knew that if we submit this script with the word 1969, I'm going to get a phone call straight away, definitely. So we thought about what to do, and actually it was the stage manager that says, why don't you submit the script, but write out 1969. N-I-N-E-T-E-E-N. So we submitted the script, and of course, it's just this body of text, right? And no phone call. So I always see this like a dance that we're gonna do. And even often when we did another country, we did a Malaysia-Singapore cooperation. And this was actually a few months after Lee Kuan Yew, the previous Prime Minister had passed away. So it was quite a potentially strange moment, and they were wondering why are we doing this Malaysia-Singapore thing. And I actually was called up to be interviewed by a 16-agency committee. So basically I walked in and it was like a hall, and everybody was sitting in a corner. Each one had that little mic that you see in the UN kind of press. Like the religious community was there, the police was there, and basically they were just saying, okay, why do you want to do this piece of work, about Malaysia and Singapore, kind of like now. And so I just say, oh, it's about building friendship, it's cultural, so you kind of need to learn to do this, I would say a dance with them. Yeah. Actually, it's very interesting to actually try and meet the special branch, the people who do come to your show. I mean, they watch your show every night. I mean, they learn a lot about Thai culture scene and, theatre, and, so we've had special branch who come and watch the shows, and they look so bored, and we feel really sad, and we just want to try and explain, this is about a different perspective, so they are people too, so yeah. They are citizens also. Any more responses? If not, I can just wrap this up. So thank you very much. It was really a fantastic journey. And thank you for your contributions. Everyone's feedback was very, very useful. Thank you very much.